Here's a question. Did his mother actually name him civil rights icon? John is just his middle name. Every time I turned on the television over the weekend and caught a little bit of the news, oh, civil rights icon John Lewis. Well, he may have been quite a heroic figure back in, I guess, the early 1960s. But some of his actions, which are so partisan now, and for a political cause that the ends justify the means in the modern Democrat Party. So, there's no moral choice that they make. They just go out and do it. But when he stated the other day that Donald Trump was an illegitimate president and that he wasn't going to attend the inauguration, first of all, I'll take his seat. Who cares? If you don't want to show up, well, fine, good riddance. Don't let the door hit you in the backside. But if he was such a great, wonderful human being and hero of the American civil rights cause, he's not helping his own, how shall we put it, historical review with this type of behavior. Secondly, you may have forgotten this by now, but last year, about this time, Bernie Sanders was gearing up to give quite a challenge to Hillary Clinton during the primary process. And who knows, if it hadn't been for the nefarious activities of the DNC to tilt the stage in her favor, Sanders may have actually pulled it off. Now, I'm not recommending him as a president of the United States, but Sanders may have actually ended up winning the general election because he was trying to appeal to the same voters, the blue collar, the working class people in this country that Donald Trump ended up picking up in large numbers and then turning that into electoral victory. So Bernie Sanders had said in his bio that he had been involved in the civil rights movement in the 1960s. John Lewis, working as a hack for the Democrat Party, no pun intended there, a lot of hacking going on over at the DNC. John Lewis came out and said, I have no memory. Well, he didn't say it like that. His English is a little bit, it's not, English is a second language for this guy by the sounds of things. But John Lewis said something to the effect that I don't have any recollection of Bernie Sanders ever being involved in the movement. Well, John Lewis was involved down in Georgia and Alabama and that part of the country. This is a big land, is it not? Bernie Sanders at the time was in Chicago. So and plus he had a full head of dark hair at the time. Now he looks like a mad scientist, balding with the unkempt white hair. So it's very possible that the two would have never met because, well, Chicago is quite distant from Selma, Alabama. And yet media said, oh, well, John Lewis has no recollection of Bernie Sanders. A few days later, an old photograph emerged of Bernie Sanders being arrested in Chicago by Chicago police while taking part in some sort of civil rights action. And that shut John Lewis up at the time. But it shows you what this guy is really all about. And media is not being what I would call unbiased on this because media doesn't like Donald Trump. And they don't want you to like Donald Trump. So they go ahead and they just, civil rights icon, John Lewis. Doesn't say that on his birth certificate. There's nothing about civil rights icon there. But it's almost as if everything has to be qualified about this guy by saying that, and then you're supposed to not criticize him at all. Therefore, anything John Lewis says has got to be the final word. 8:11 right now, and we've got 8 degrees. Couple more cold nights, and then hopefully it's gone for good. Bill Colley with you on Top Story this morning on News Radio 1310, KLIX, and NewsRadio1310.com. I'm telling you, the entire Washington establishment is trying to figure out how it can derail Donald Trump. And the party seems to be irrelevant. Look at Marco Rubio. Look at John McCain. Look at Lindsey Graham. These people on the Republican side are not helping the Trump cause in any way. Now, I should say that of all people, Ted Cruz, who supposedly had a lot of bad blood at the convention and got booed off the stage, Ted Cruz has actually been working very hard to get Trump's nominees approved. And so there are people who buried the hatchet and said, you know what, let's make common cause because we do have some areas of common agreement. And I'm happy to see that. But you've got people like Lewis, and you've got 4 or 5 days of media coverage out of that, just breathless. This morning I turned on Morning Joe for a few minutes. I don't know how you can get away with self-abuse on live television, but they do it over there in that overwrought earnestness. And they really believe what they think and they say is what the majority of Americans believe. Well, let's be honest. Other than me, there aren't a lot of people watching Morning Joe. And in fact, if Joe and Mika had to go in the witness protection program, it wouldn't really be much different than what they're doing right now, being that they are so anonymous. I mean, they're like the ciphers of television news. There are people who are getting criticized, though, in mainstream media for actually pointing out Bob Woodward, for about a year now, has been playing contrarian. This is one of the guys who helped uncover the Watergate scandal. Now, his old pal, Carl Bernstein, was actually ripping Trump last week as being a fascist and a Nazi and a no good Nick and a liar and going to destroy the United States. So apparently, Bob and Carl don't spend a lot of time kibitzing any longer, and they're off on a different script. Each one of them is coming from a different hymnal. But this is Bob Woodward talking about the whole CIA situation yesterday while making an appearance on Fox News. This fact was with Chris Wallace, which is the premier Fox talking head program that takes place on Sundays. It's the entry that competes with Meet the Press and Face the Nation and This Week over at ABC. But listen to what he says about this CIA report about Trump getting the golden shower and being in league with the Russians.
I've lived in this world for 45 years where you get things and people make allegations. That is a garbage document. It never should have been presented as part of an intelligence briefing. As you suggested, other channels have the White House counsel give it to Trump's incoming White House counsel. So Trump's right to be upset about that. And I think if you look at the real chronology and the nature of the battle here, those intelligence chiefs who are the best we've had, who are terrific and have done great work, made a mistake here. And when people make mistakes, they should apologize.
No, his fellow travelers in mainstream media are not happy with Bob Woodward. Many months ago, he was talking on one of these programs and pretty much said the same thing, that all of this hyperventilating about Trump was just again overwrought earnestness. And when he said that, he was called out by the liberal left, and that includes, of course, I know it's redundant, mainstream media in this country. And I even remember watching the Morning Joe program at the time, and all of the liberal columnists on the program, some of whom worked for the Washington Post, which was a dying newspaper at the time the Watergate scandal broke, and it revived the paper and allowed the paper to succeed for a few more decades. So these people who work at the Post actually owe people like Bob Woodward a debt of gratitude, but they were all saying, "Oh, Bob Woodward is losing it. he's gone off the deep end. Oh, he's insane. He belongs in the booby hatch." They might not quite have put it in those words because that would be politically incorrect, but that's what they were saying about him. And it makes them angry when this guy, speaking of icons, this guy took down a sitting president of the United States. But it makes them angry when he won't toe the liberal line today. A lot of people don't know this, but Bob Woodward comes from a long line of Republicans. His family has been involved in Republican Party politics in Indiana for decades. Even Carl Bernstein, as much as a flaming liberal as he is, had a very good friend who worked in the Nixon White House. You might know the name. You'd know the voice. Bueller, Bueller, Bueller. Ben Stein, who's a diehard Republican and a conservative and a resident of Sandpoint, he and Carl Bernstein were best friends as kids. So there were some people in the White House who actually thought at the time that perhaps that Ben Stein, happened to be Deep Throat. Of course, it turned out to be our own Mark Felt, um, who never came back here, did he? Once he moved, he decided that he didn't need to make Twin Falls much of a stop on the train, if you will. It's 8:17. Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310, KLIX and newsradio1310.com. We are up to 10. I won't say that's a quick warm-up, but it's a darn sight prettier than the 8. And when I got started this morning in the car, it was 4. And by the time I got to work, it was 6. We were now out of the single digits, and that's always a good thing. If you'd like to reach our program today, you can give me a shout. The telephone number is 736-0300, 736-0300. Also, my email address, bill.colley@townsquaremedia.com. That's bill.colley@townsquaremedia.com. I've got a break in a couple of minutes, so we might have to push some of those calls back during the course of this hour. I also wanted to tell you I got a very nice note yesterday from one of my old high school friends. Her name is Linda. Linda lived around the corner from me when we were kids growing up, and she had been asking me about the total body transformation system, which of course I've been partaking of for a few months. And if you recall, I've dropped over 50 pounds because of this diet, and I've done it in a healthy manner. Linda had asked me about the diet. I got her hooked up with Don Chandler, who also has lost 50 pounds on this diet. And Linda has lost 9 pounds in 1 week. And she wrote me yesterday. She said, I got to ask you a question. Does it keep up like this? And I wrote back and said, it does. And she acknowledges it is not difficult to follow the guidelines on the total body transformation system because it's not some sort of yo-yo diet developed by a company that's been in business for 2 decades, and they have a A-plus rating from the Better Business Bureau. It's a scientifically proven diet and been endorsed by scientists from some of the leading universities in this country as well. Some of those are the well-known Ivy League universities. And it will help you burn 6 times more fat and lose 8 times more weight than normal results from diet and exercise alone. The meal replacements often are better than the foods you were already eating, something we've got to mention. So it's a healthy way to go about doing this, and you still get a healthy amount of calories during the course of a day. The average participant loses 22 pounds and loses 4 inches off the waist in just 60 days, the first 60 days. And I wanted to point out, because people are asking me frequently about the cost. When you sit down and you calculate what you'd be spending on the groceries for those other meals that you're replacing, it's almost the same. Their costs are almost identical. I figured it out, and I discount shop at places like Winco. So, I'm not spending not spending a huge amount of money on groceries, but it's about the same. So, it's like simply moving money from one pocket to the other. It's a wash when it comes to that. It's backed up with a full money back guarantee. And if you'd like to know more, you've got to give Don Chandler a telephone call. He's right here in Twin Falls. Don's number is 208-731-3560. As I mentioned, Don lost 50 pounds on the total body transformation system. His telephone number once more, 731-3560. We've got more of Top Story ahead. Bill Colley with you this cold morning. We will have a little rain by the middle of the week. Probably wouldn't be such a bad thing. Those of you who may have been driving on Fillmore Street the last couple of days over behind Costco know what I'm talking about. We need to melt off some of that ice. It stops you from skidding and doing a 180. Not that I'm bragging. Somebody told me that we have a holiday today. At first I thought it was because the Cowboys lost yesterday. Every Monday after a Cowboys loss should be a national holiday, but it is actually Martin Luther King Day. My friend Mike Payne just dropped me a line and pointed out that John Lewis, when he was involved in the civil rights movement, took a beating that nearly killed him. But he said he took a lot of blows to the head, and we see what happens to boxers and football players and the like, and it may be affecting Lewis's thinking process today. 824, Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. We're at 10. Coming up Wednesday on the program, he hasn't found many alternates lately. Dr. Jonathan Tripp has been with us the last couple of weeks in studio, and I believe the doctor is back this coming Wednesday. The doctor is also available to take some of your comments or questions about your own health issues. You can just give us a call, and it's free advice from the medical professional, 736-0300. He'll be here between 8:30 and 9 o'clock. It's called Better Health with Tripp Family Medicine, and he'd like to remind you, life's too short not to feel good. His office is still looking for new patients. You can find Tripp Family Medicine on Fillmore Street, directly across from the main post office, right here in Twin Falls. So we've got, and we'll likely be carrying it live right here on News Radio 1310, KLIX and newsradio1310.com. That is the inauguration coming up. It'll follow our show immediately Friday because it's noon Eastern time, but it'll take place 10 o'clock our time. Everything in this country, I guess, has to be done to appease the East Coast. So we'll have Donald Trump being sworn in, and we'll likely, I know people don't really like to hear Rush Limbaugh interrupted, but I think Rush is going to be covering it as well. And so we'll be carrying that. But I'm a little concerned. The left keeps talking about violence and, there's been an uptick in hate crimes. Yeah, they've all been against Whitey. We should point that out, right? They tend to forget that. But I'm worried about the disruption. Now, you've got a lot of people who are going, well, they don't have jobs anyway, so they're not missing work, but they're going to Washington to try and disrupt the inaugural. And I'm a little concerned because I think media is whipping them up into a frenzy. I've got a few pieces here. This is from Pravda on the Potomac, the Washington Post. Meet the biker hosting the biggest pro-Trump demonstration at the inauguration. The guy's name is Chris Cox, and he's one of several biker groups that will be there in support of the president-elect. But the thing is, media doesn't like the idea of this private citizen and his friends being there. And so the writer says Cox launched the organization 2 years ago, back when Trump was still running what was considered a chaotic campaign. Since then, he has hosted rallies throughout the country with his biker group growing to tens of thousands of mostly white men. Ooh. Well, it's true. I don't know of a lot of Latino or black or Asian motorcycle gangs. And gang is probably not the proper word. Clubs, can we use that? I'm sure they exist, but it's just part of the culture of blue collar working white America. They love motorcycles, but they've got to make sure that they're mostly white men. Well, that could also mean that there are some people involved in this very same motorcycle club who are Latino or who are black or who are Asian or who are left-handed, but the Post wants you to think about just a bunch of white men. Oh, they're not wearing their bed sheets today, but we know who they are. And then it says, many of whom are veterans. Was that supposed to be a dig too? Or does service to your country still get a little respect at Pravda on the Potomac? And then the writer has this to say. During Trump's own rallies and at the Republican National Convention, the group has served as a vigilante security force, providing human barricades between supporters and protesters. Vigilante. Are they trying to plant some seeds for the reader? I mean, in subconsciously, all white men and vigilantes, and military veterans, very dangerous. Oh, they like firearms too, apparently, and they know how to use them. Yes. But yet you're going to have all of these people, Al Sharpton is going to be there. I guess he's already there leading all sorts of demonstrations and marches. Al Sharpton has left dead bodies behind him. There was a store in New York City that was firebombed. It was a Jewish-owned store, and I believe 8 people died in the firebombing. After his heated rhetoric, people always say, talk radio is dangerous. Well, Al Sharpton, there is evidence behind him of what real danger is in this country. And then you had people who were, shot in various parts of New York City following some of his heated rhetoric back in the 1990s. And yet this guy got a job. I mean, they hired him in mainstream media to do his own show at MSDNC. And yet they say that it's Whitey that's the hateful one and that Donald Trump is the hateful one. Nobody, to my knowledge, has had their store firebombed because Trump suggested it happen. Media is very selective in what they report in this country. And then I've got this from The Spectator. Ross Kaminsky says, the caricature no better than virulently hateful cartoon representations of Jews over the centuries, rhetorically dresses Republicans in jackboots and puts white sheets over their heads and paints them with pencil-thin mustaches. This race libel has been on full display in recent days from the venomous President Barack Obama, the venerable Representative John Lewis, and the venal Senator Cory Booker. The basic question is, quote, what is the proper purpose of government, unquote. And he said the other side seems to feel that if you ask that you're being racist. He says, I do indeed object to a hardworking middle class having their earnings rated on behalf of the undeserving, but neither I nor the dollar taken from me, nor my accountant, nor the IRS agent scanning my tax return gives a whit whether the recipient of my dollar was white, brown, purple, or plaid. Obama imagines, he writes, our national political conversation is one in which every economic issue is framed as minorities pilfering whites, when in fact no economic issue is framed that way. He also says, notice that Lewis doesn't say that Jeff Sessions wouldn't stand up for any American's individual rights regardless of color, religion, sexual orientation, etc. He simply implies it, offering no evidence while leaving us to conclude. The writer says that a pleasant smile and a friendly demeanor are the signs of a man who desperately wants to curb stomp a gay Negro. See, that's what they're up to, and the media is just fueling all of this. Again, because the media doesn't like Donald Trump, they don't want you to like Donald Trump. 8:30, Bill Colley with you on Top Story. Randy Staples in 10 minutes on KLIX. I wanted to point out, too, as well, media has been trying to spread this notion that Donald Trump, of course, it got some help from Meryl Streep at the Golden Globes, that Donald Trump was besmirching a disabled newspaper reporter from the New York Times. And, well, as it turns out, well, let me get into that in just a moment. I want to remind people if you're listening today, thank you. And if you're having trouble listening, you need to have someone take a look at your ears. Mount Harrison Audiology, a place I've been recommending for a very, very long time, and Dr. Christine Pickup, a doctor of audiology. She'd like to open your world to some sounds that you may have some difficulty picking up now at this particular stage of your life. There's a new hearing aid out that works with the brain, and it helps those with hearing loss. You'll hear more naturally than any previous aid on the market. And she's offering a 2-week free trial with this. Call today to schedule your personal fitting appointment with Dr. Pickup. Open your world to better hearing. Call Mount Harrison Audiology, and the telephone number is 312-0957. That's 312-0957. I came across this morning at Washington Examiner. I've got to share a little bit of this story with you. It's a writer is trying to clarify, which the rest of the media refuses to do, about Donald Trump. And I remember seeing the video of that. There was a reporter and Trump was actually quoting him when Trump said that he'd seen people cheering on tops of buildings after the 9/11 attacks, Muslims cheering from buildings. And he was referring to the story that this reporter had actually reported, 16 years ago now, almost 16 years ago. And then the reporter said, I don't remember doing that. So Trump got on stage and he flailed his arms around and he made fun of the guy. And then we heard, well, the guy's disabled. Trump's making fun of his disability. And that's what Meryl Streep was talking about at the Golden Globes. A writer by the name of Eddie Scarry. I'd like a name like that. Eddie Scarry, writing at Washington Examiner. It's a myth the news media love to reminisce on, partially because it reminds them of a simpler time when they thought Trump was certain to lose the election. But he goes on to explain what exactly happened. Trump started jerking his arms around and in a mocking tone said, I don't know what I said. I don't know what I remember. And he writes, if Trump's purpose was to mock Kovaleski, that was the reporter, anyone watching would have never known it, and not just because no one would know who Kovaleski is if the media hadn't manufactured a controversy. The media would have everyone believe Kovaleski has Parkinson's disease or at least restless leg syndrome. Anyone can search Kovaleski on YouTube and see videos of the reporter. He doesn't jerk his arms around, in fact, because his mobility is limited. He's still. He says a corpse would be doing a more accurate imitation. By the way, now this is the key part here. By the way, Trump has mocked bank executives, Ted Cruz, and the response President Obama's generals give to questions about fighting the Islamic State, and he used the exact same effect as he did for Kovaleski. Now, the generals don't have that disability. Ted Cruz doesn't have that disability, and neither do bank executives. But the media ignore those because they didn't depress Meryl Streep. So in other words, this is just, Trump is actually trying to imitate people he says are groveling, whether to appease the politically correct or claim that they never said something. And it's not getting the media attention, or they're not explaining it in context because, once again, they don't like Donald Trump. And once more, let me reiterate, they don't want you to. So talk about fake news, reporting this. I have a habit sometimes when I talk about whining liberals on the air, I pull up my hand like it's a claw, my right hand, and I do this because I saw a production of Richard III one time where the actor playing Richard III, as he was whining and about his particular plight in life, was doing the same thing. I don't do it because I'm mocking somebody's disability. And Trump has said, they can't read my mind. They don't know what I was thinking. But again, in media, we try often, and I do it too, to impart what people's views might be. But that's only my opinion. But here you go. He wasn't mocking that guy's disability. It's how he portrays people when he makes fun of several different people, which has been one of the charming things about him for a lot of American voters, is that he is not in any way politically correct. It's coming up on 8:39. In a minute or so, we'll take a short break, and then Randy Staples will join us from Idaho Weekly Briefing. Very quickly, somebody in media was saying over the weekend that President Obama is doing a wonderful job helping with the transition. Speaking of fake news, fake reporting anyway, this is Obama on 60 Minutes last night.
I think it would have long-term consequences for peace and security in the region and the United States because of our investment in the region, and because we care so deeply about Israel, I think has a legitimate interest in saying to a friend, this is a problem.
That's why he's trying to explain away throwing Israel under the bus. And obviously, I don't know that he's getting much traction with all of that. But as he leaves office, he's trying to cover up a lot of messes. You know, you wouldn't do that if you gave him a litter box. Anyway, enough of that. More on the way with Randy Staples, as I mentioned. Randy is the publisher of Idaho Weekly Briefing. He'll be joining us as he does most Monday mornings on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. The show is Top Story with Bill Colley.